Okay. All right. Hi.
Where to start?
Well, I think you should introduce yourself. I mean, presumably the people that are listening to this already know who you are, but those people that are out there, fingers crossed, in our podcast world may not. So go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name's Austin. I am a counseling psychology doctoral student here at the University of Oregon. And I do identify as a queer individual, and I also do identify as a person of color. I am white passing, so that just means that most people, most of the time, perceive me as white. I do get questions about, like, what are you? Like, you're not white, you're something, but I don't know, you're not, like, you don't fit in my box of race. So I get that a lot. So, just to clarify things, my dad's white, and my mom's Afro-Latino.
Okay.
So I am 3 races all at one.
Right.
And I am, like, the lighter skin of my family.
Okay.
So that's just, like, my background around it. But I was basically raised by women of color my entire life.
Right.
Pretty much all of it.
So when we talk about race and ethnicity, we need to understand we're talking about 2 different things.
Yeah, my upbringing was kind of unique in my family in the sense of my mom was actually more interacted more with both sides of the family, where I know I talked to you a little bit about this, but like my Mexican side of the family completely rejected the culture and like assimilated as much as they possibly could. I grew up around that interesting dynamic of like, yeah, we have this culture, but we don't talk about it because we don't really like it.
Right.
On that side of the family. And also that side of the family was racist towards the black side of the family, which is also just an instance of like people of color can hold bias and be prejudiced as well. It's not like we're immune from it.
People within your own family displayed overt racism toward people within your own family.
Yes.
Right, yeah, okay.
Like, would not interact with my grandpa at all, who is black.
Okay.
Like, just did not respect him. My mom, this is why I say I'm in a unique place in my family, is definitely more on the liberal side of, like, out of everyone in the entire family. So, she had me around all of them. Like, I interacted with both sides of the family. Like, I wasn't, like, solely like
secluded or isolated
or
from
anything
parts
like
of the family.
that. So I interacted with so many different races. I had my dad's white side, my mom's Mexican side, and then my mom's black side, and then I was just like constantly interacting with people of like different skin colors, especially from my own. I remember, it's funny too, because I remember one time we had like a family reunion on the black side of the family, and then just me and my mom were there out of all of them. And I was just like, like, this is so strange. Like, so, I do not look anything like them.
Yeah, but was that it? Like, when was the intellectual moment where you're like, holy shit, I'm different? Or racism is a real thing?
Yeah, I mean, younger, it wasn't really a thing because I interacted with diverse individuals. I grew up in a rural town, and surprisingly that wasn't much of an issue, even though I was like the one Mexican kid, which I really which is sad considering like how white skinned I am that I was the Mexican kid. But it probably wasn't until I was later in high school and it started to come up of like the what are you question a lot, and like people making fun of my like multiracial identity where I didn't fit in their box of what a certain race or ethnicity or just person of color should look like. Right. Where, like, I had curly black hair, like that really coarse. Like, that was, like, mixed with, like, Hispanic hair plus white hair. Okay. My skin was darker than most because I was in white Florida. Right. So people would just be like, what are you? And I would, like, I'm these things. And they were like, oh, that's too complicated. And would call me, like, a Jewish Mexican. Because that's explain the hair, and then I'm not white, so
which is
even though I am.
well, okay, so but that's like just the idea of ambiguity. Yeah. In and of itself is othering. right?
Yeah.
Right. Because you don't fit in a box that we see, therefore you're a thing that we don't understand. That is the act of othering you from everybody else, right? So you experienced this for a very long time.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced otherness because of the skin color and also because of just my queer identity where I was like never fit in anywhere and always uncomfortable. Even inside like people who are like aspects of my racial ethnic identity, like I don't fit in and I feel uncomfortable because I'm like, part of me is like, can I fully say that I'm a person of color when I have benefited from white privilege where so racism and discrimination wasn't in my mind until I went to college and was like enlightened about all of the like systemic racism that exists in society, because I never personally experienced like outright discrimination at all. I just got the othering side of things.
Yeah. So differentiate between those two.
So I have more experience like invalidating of my identity, which is like a more internal struggle of like, who am I? Like, where do I fit in? Where do I belong? But when it comes to discrimination, I have never been rejected from any aspect of life because of my racial ethnic identity.
Passed over for an apartment, or a credit card, or a purchase or something. Like
that's never happened to me. So that's where my privilege of white passing comes in. It's like, I've never been discriminated. And
it's not just that you're a really nice person.
No. Definitely not.
Well, we know that that's true. So, okay. And then compare that with what we're seeing right now. I mean, it's really obvious. Like, if you don't know, but, like, say it out loud, right?
Like, the system has been set up since the beginning of time. Of like the society of like it's going to oppress especially black people, but people of color in general. Where that's where I started to learn in college. It's just like I took a class on like drugs and society, and we focused on how drug laws were designed to incarcerate people of color. Where there used to be, especially like the example that comes to mind the most is like the difference between the penalty and like criminalization of the use of cocaine and crack, which are the same drug, just different forms. But little old ladies were more likely to use cocaine, and people of color were more likely to use crack. So the sentencing laws were extremely higher for crack versus cocaine because of who was using it. They didn't want to put away the white ladies, so they were going to up the penalty for
and
crack,
stigmatize not only the drug but the whole culture with it, right? And side note, research shows that white people are disproportionately more likely to be drug dealers than people of color.
But black people are more likely to be incarcerated
and for longer periods of time as a result of it.
And it's not like those laws went away that I just talked about. They still exist. There's still sentencing disparities between types of drugs just based on who uses them. Like that hasn't disappeared at all. It still exists. And that's just one way like how systems set up are still systems that exist today because people refuse to change them.
Well, and not to mention the things that hopefully you've heard of, like redlining and other policies that responded to the civil rights movement in the 60s of doubling down on segregating people of color from white people for the benefit of those who support the system or create the system. So take us up to, so that, sort of gives you an instance or an example of systemic racism, historic systemic racism. Speak specifically about this moment,
like research shows that when use of violence comes in against like versus a white person and a black person, people are automatically like more likely to use extreme forces of violence against people of color versus white people, even though it might be the exact same situation. Like I talked to you about the study where like people were just like imaginary shooting like a white person or a black person, and then it would just be automatic, like a white person and a black person would pop up at the same time.
And whether you reacted,
and people would across the board, we're more likely to automatically shoot the black person.
All people.
All people of colors. Yeah, regardless of their race,
Correct.
they were more likely to shoot the black person. And that speaks to this sense of like there's this more implicit racism now that exists and is more at effect now.
Okay.
People are still outwardly racist and will say the N-word and all that stuff, but it's gone more underground because people are like, we're a post-race society. We don't want to talk about this anymore, and we're not racist.
Right.
It's like we're all implicitly a little bit racist to some degree.
Okay.
And studies consistently
show that.
Yeah.
So let's go that direction now. So for those of you that are listening, we're walking through this with the presumption that that I know very little, and I might chime in as if I have some sort of sense, but but really I don't. And so what I want you as a listener to understand is that I want you to put yourself in my ears and to try to hear Austin as he walks me through some of the typical things that I might react and have felt personally, and you might be feeling as well. And if you don't identify with those things, that's fine. Obviously, everybody's journey is their own, but my goal is to try to share just where we might be coming from individually. So, okay, well, I'm not racist.
Yeah.
Individually, right? Look, I have friends who are
you. That's the
I employ a person of color. Let's double down on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I get that's probably the most one that I experienced.
Okay, well, it's the first
most,
one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
my dad does that. He's super racist, but he always says, "Oh, I'm not racist because I have black ones, and they're good ones. There's good ones out there." And I'm like, Dad, you married like a Afro-Latino woman,
right?
Like this baffles me to this day. It makes no sense, but yeah, like the sense of like I'm not explicitly racist, therefore I don't contribute to the systems of oppression that exist, which is a total misconception. Because once again the implicit biases at work, whether or not you think you may not outwardly being like mean.
Correct.
Air quotes, or like outright discriminating against people, you have certain biases where you're not aware of it, that you're doing it, that you're having this differential treatment for white people over people of color, where you treat white people in a more positive light than you do black people. And that's just consistent across the board for individuals. That's just like this unconscious level things that happen as well. That's this automatic positive association with whiteness versus blackness. Correct.
Like the story I told at the top of the episode that I referred to. So not only that, but, my society, we live in Oregon, like, we haven't, we're progressive here, right? And so therefore my life is separate from the experience of racism as a whole or as a group. And why is that not true for me?
Yeah, I think there's this idea of like, you don't contribute to the system of oppression directly, but you still like receive the benefits of the system regardless of whether or not you contribute to it. Right. Or you benefit from the system not changing because it favors your race.
There it is. Okay, right. So, like we discussed, because systems where, whether it's jobs, again, mortgages, relationships are accepted as in society, etc. I benefit from all of those things keeping people of color at a disadvantage, whether I intend to or not. There's that, and that in and of itself is white privilege.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we're defining, go a little bit more down that for me.
Of white privilege? Yeah. White privilege is this piece of just like, you receive certain benefits because of your whiteness. Or whether or not, like, you had a difficult life. I'm not saying that people don't have difficult lives. I'm a therapist.
Right.
I know.
Yeah. This is what I do. This is what you do.
Yeah,
exactly. So individual suffering is a separate conversation from the experience of society.
White privilege means that your race isn't contributing to your life in a negative way.
In a negative way. Okay. Yes.
Where I do argue that you do receive positive benefits of your whiteness, regardless of whether or not you
Correct.
have a good or bad life. Like, you still have that bump up over people of color.
I get to get mad and speak to people's supervisors when I'm upset about certain things.
Where if a woman of color does that, they turn into angry black women.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I get to benefit from unemployment when I lose my job. Whereas if people of color find themselves in that system, it's much more difficult to navigate.
And there are welfare queens where they're freeloaders.
Correct.
And they
Correct.
suck up all the money and they don't want to get jobs and they're just
typical,
lazy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is stigmatized language that we've all heard, whether we've used it ourselves or not. Okay.
Yeah, another thing that also happens around white privilege is like this feeling of being uncomfortable. Or like that's a form of white privilege, especially right now, that's coming up. Of like,
I don't know.
I don't want to talk about race, so it's uncomfortable. So I'm just not. I'm going to distance myself away from it. Right. I can't do that.
Right.
It's
correct.
It impacts my family. It impacts all my friends.
Yep.
It impacts my personal life. Like, I can't escape it like a white person. Like, it's always going to be there for me.
Right.
I can't be like, I'm uncomfortable with this, so I'm just never going to talk about it. I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist. Like, that's not a reality. Right. And that's another form of white privilege of like, you can just be like, I'm going to disengage and not talk about race and racism and oppression and privilege because it makes me uncomfortable.
So, and many of us right now are experiencing that, right? And whether we're sitting with it or I don't know, but I would hope that you would be. But that, like, as a qualified sense, like, this makes me sad and this makes me uncomfortable. And even just sitting here talking to Austin, like, I get kind of teared up and like angry and frustrated about it. Like, but guess what? Feeling that way, one, it's not going to do anything in and of itself, right? And my sort of fragile ego with regard to being uncomfortable with this is exactly what allows us to reframe the argument so we don't have to be uncomfortable anymore and reduces or eliminates the person of color voice.
Yeah, and it also perpetuates this idea of like, in the experience of people of color, like catering to white people not to make them uncomfortable.
Right.
Or like, I'm not going to bring this up because they're going to get super defensive and like shut down because they don't, I'm calling them out on their privilege and white people don't like that. So I'm not going to do it to protect them.
Yeah.
And it's like this constant battle for us of like, am I going to call out this instance of racism because it's going to just be this huge deal and I'm going to make a white person or an entire room uncomfortable by being that person of color calling out racism.
Right. Well, and that's, we're just discussing one.
I'm not sure if it's necessarily, that's a tricky one to say because it gets into this dynamic of like oppression war, like who's oppressed the most.
Yeah, okay.
That's like a tricky area to go. Right now, what is happening though is like black people are being murdered. And that's like what needs to stop. And that's like what we're focusing on.
Yes, okay.
Like it's not like, oh, like black people are oppressed the most, so that's
no.
We're gonna focus. This like, is just like this is
people are dying.
Proportion. And
people are being murdered.
Dying, and this keeps on happening over and over and over again. And it's no one's doing anything to change it. And we've been like this complete history of like oppressing black people in our country. So it's just like this systemic system that's more targeted at black people.
Yeah.
Where I do experience like way more oppression related to my sexual identity for sure.
Sure.
Where that's where like I feel uncomfortable in whatever setting I'm in regardless because I grew up in the South. That was instilled of like I'm abnormal.
Yeah.
And that bias transcends race and ethnicity in the sense of anyone from any racial ethnic group can be homophobic.
Right.
So like I'm not safe from anyone. Like literally And then I don't have a space to go to like necessarily like my black friends or my Mexican friends, which is weird in general. It's like a form of tokenism. Because they can be biased, again, super homophobic, especially certain people of color, like communities are way more homophobic than others. That's just part of it. Yeah. And so I'm stigmatized in that part of my identity, but also the fact of like being in this in-between area as a multiracial person. Like I don't really fully belong in that neat little box of race and ethnicity at all.
Back to where we started, which is to put you in a box is in any box is in and of itself the action that causes this to begin with. We're all humans, and our work in the yoga world, in yoga as a system, is to learn for the purpose of unity, to be one. And by being one with ourselves, we become one with everyone else. And it also works the other direction. So that by becoming one with everyone else, through compassion, I'm getting ahead of myself, through compassion, through kindness, etc., we're learning to become one with ourselves. Right. So just because you don't know how to do it for you on the inside means that turn your lens outside and find ways that you in your community can be more inclusive, more compassionate, listen more. But we'll get to that in a second. So okay, fine. I've benefited from a system of oppression, from white privilege. I recognize that now, but now what?
What do you want me to do with it?
Exactly.
Except you can do something with
it.
Okay,
alright.
Like, privilege isn't this all... It is negative in many ways if you do nothing with it and just benefit from it. But...
Right. Say that again. so we hear it.
Yeah, like you can use your privilege. It's not all bad, but you can use it to benefit people of color and really wield that power to uplift other people, which is what's sort of happening now is where like white people are using their power and their platforms to like, as you're doing here, to like uplift the voices of people of color and give us a more platform. And also just like white protesters jumping in front of black protesters to mitigate the harm that police will do to people of color.
Which is obvious. You can see it on the news.
That's using your privilege.
Right. And that is an important point. My role isn't to speak for you, right? Yeah. It's to listen first.
Yeah. Listen. And we also do need white people to speak up against the system of oppression.
So which are two separate things, right? So listening to people of color and educating yourself on that, and taking the onus upon yourself to go out and educate and learn about these systems, and then speak up. Okay.
Yeah, and call out racism when you see it. Like, if your racist uncle says something at Thanksgiving dinner, don't just sit there and let it go. Like, address it.
Okay.
Where...
Good uncles, man.
A lot of those.
It's true.
Where, like, if you see a person of color being discriminated against, speak up, say something. Use your power as a white person to address racism when you see it in everyday life. Yeah, there's this thing called the myth of meritocracy that happens in America, which is basically as long as you work hard and do all the education things, you can be successful and be powerful and enact change. It's not true. The system is designed to oppress people of color, regardless of their educational experiences, when they're not given the opportunities to actually engage in those educational opportunities or get the jobs we're in Senate or House of Representatives to actually create change. We're not allowed to do it. And that's when we need white people to step in and be the voice and enact change, because they're the ones that put the system up in the first place, and they're the only ones that currently have the power to remove it.
Correct.
Especially given our current administration.
Correct. So, as a metaphor, because I always like to make them, are sailing the ship and we need to change course. Like, it's our responsibility to take this opportunity to move in a direction that is more inclusive and stops the murder of innocent Americans, innocent humans. You know, these are Americans we're talking about. Yeah. These are our countrymen. This is our community, and we're letting it get away from us because on the ship that we sailed or created ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people of color have tried to.
Correct.
We've done many marches. We continuously talk about it, and nothing has changed.
It's been 55
so
years.
So clearly, nothing that we're doing is working because
yep,
we are not the group in power.
Right.
This is an institutional aspect of everything. Institutional racism, oppressive systems that are at work. That even if we all come together and unify and do all these lovely protests, like, it's not going to change unless the people of power, which are white people, listen and do something about it and don't go, I'm uncomfortable with that, so I don't want to deal with it. You are still the ones that are in power, so you still need to right the wrongs, unfortunately, of what came before you.
Right, absolutely.
And if you don't, you're perpetuating systems of injustice.
Right.
Or, like, that's where white silence is violence, because you have the power to change it, and you refuse to do anything while people die. It's almost like if I was watching someone die right in front of me, and I was like, I didn't shoot the person, so I'm not going to help them. Like, you're still an accessory to, like, that person dying.
Yeah. And this is exactly what happened with George Floyd. And countless others.
Yeah.
But people tried to intervene. The people that were sworn to protect him and the officers themselves didn't intervene to protect him. The people tried to intervene, and he still died.
Yeah.
Resources, since we have you, and since you're willing, since you've agreed.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Don't expect people of color to constantly educate you. Do your own work.
Correct. Yeah. Resources, people, things you can point our community to.
Yeah, there's tons of books.
Tons of books.
Yeah, like How to Be an Anti-Racist is the key one. That's related to also just, like, not being outwardly racist isn't enough.
Right.
Like, you have to actively confront these systems of oppression to be an ally or an advocate. And that book's really helpful. Also, there's a tons of books of, like, analyzing, like, your white privilege and how you benefit from white supremacy. So I think one of them's, like, White Supremacy and Me, which is also really helpful for white people particularly. Because it's really about, like, self-reflection, looking at how you benefit from your white identity. And while you may not be a white supremacist, you benefit from it regardless.
Yeah.
That's a helpful book. There's also just a ton of Instagram accounts right now that are super helpful. I follow @TheConscious Kid.
@TheConscious Kid?
Yeah, which is, like, super cool.
Yeah.
Super cool stuff going on there as well. And there's a bunch of others as well.
I just came across a new Seattle collective of POC yoga teachers, and I'm blanking on its handle, but they seem really rad. Yeah.
Yeah, and then donating is helpful. Obviously, this is a weird time to be donating because people are experiencing economic hardship. So you can donate, do it. It would be ideal if you donated to businesses and organizations that are led by people of color.
Correct.
Or I think the Minnesota Freedom Fund
is. Yeah.
And then just continue to have these conversations with people. Don't let this die down again, which is our cycle for many different aspects of our society, where black person dies, there's outrage, disappears, another black person has to die before the conversation comes up again. Right. Same thing with school shooting. School shooting happens, outrage, disappears. Yeah, and don't let your white fragility get in the way. Whereas that automatic defensiveness of, like, uncomfortableness of, like, as soon as race comes into the picture of, like, I'm not racist, I don't do this. Take some time, process what the person said, and really try to understand where they're coming from and why what you said hurt them. Right. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Because it's going to happen. It's inevitable. I make mistakes. may have said something stupid during this. Like,
yeah.
If I do, people can reach out to me and be like, hey, I didn't feel great about that. I welcome that.
Yeah.
That's part of the process. Welcome that discomfort and
Absolutely.
learn from it. I've said things before to friends.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, didn't feel great about that. And they were like, let me know that they did not feel great about that. And I was like, oh, wow, yeah, you're totally right. Like, sorry. Like,
yeah.
I will definitely be better.
That's just it, though. We're a community in conversation about the issue.
Yeah.
And continue to be that. Be a member of your community. Show up, even if it is uncomfortable. Because now's not the time. Never has been the time. But now, of all times, we don't, not to be silent.
Yeah.
We need to speak up. And that's why we're taking this opportunity on our platform to do so. Be aware of your discomfort when it comes up, and sit with it long enough to allow you to listen to the person that's speaking. Maybe that's, the mirror speaking back to you, or the people that you're speaking with in your community, and sit with that long enough to then formulate a compassionate and action-oriented response.
Take a moment, just like pause, listen to what that person is saying, notice what's coming up for you personally, and take a moment, pause, reflect, be mindful of like what you say next, and not word vomit because you're uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think we got it. I mean, as far as the podcast is concerned, we solved it.
We did the thing.
We solved it, guys.
No, we did not.
We did
small
not.
Step.
Yeah, small step.
These conversations need to continue to happen.
Yeah. Well, Austin, thank you for taking the time to have the conversation with me and being willing. And, you're here as a part of our community, and we look forward to more of you and continuing this conversation as we go forward.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you. Yay.